cups. You know, we've got someone going to get some styrofoam cups and give me cups at the Krispy Kreme. So we got some actual crack back there in form of Krispy Kreme donuts. This isn't an opportunity. Well, I want to come here and beat up the Department of Audits, and you know, I want to make clear that they are our friends. They have a very complex job to do, and some of them are former co-workers, and we share some good relationships with them. And so, but we do have some issues that we want to discuss, and we want to make sure we plow through and give everybody an opportunity to gather some information so y'all can decide, and other candidates can decide whether you need to appeal your study and what we might need to do in order to be able to have successful results from that. I think the appeal deadline is on Monday, September the 5th. You got 30 days. Only the Board of Commissioners and the Board of Education can appeal the study. Both of them don't have to do it, but either one of them can. Here in Hall County, our Board of Commissioners passed a resolution in order to give the chairman of the Board of Commissioners the authority to appeal the study. I wrote the letter based on our 2015 study when you were here, Kelly, and we successfully appealed then and got some results. The last time I appealed the study was when I was in Stevens County back a long time ago. And so I think it's real important for everybody to understand that. And I've had some good conversations with people over the last couple of days. We got a number. How many people we got on Zoom there, John?
It's at least 7 or 8. Is there a count somewhere?
So we're going to go from 9 to noon. We can go longer if we need to, or go shorter. And so everybody's going to go about a half an hour. You can ask these guys any questions you want to, share among yourselves, and hopefully this will be helpful for everybody. And I appreciate y'all being here. Are we ready to get going, John, with your presentation?
As soon as Jeremy puts it on the screen, we will be. It's on the flash drive that we plugged in there.
Okay, just give us a few minutes out there in Zoom land, and we're going to get started in a minute. And we will be, by the way, for those of you that are zooming on, we'll have someone at the laptop. So if y'all want to ask some questions, you know, and communicate with the group, just go ahead and type those in whenever it's appropriate, and we'll get John or Stan or Kelly or any of the rest of them in here that want to contribute to that, the answer that you're looking for, or the comment you want to communicate. So thank you. Will we be able to share the presentation on this laptop?
It's gonna be camera. Yeah.
But via the camera, but not necessarily
not through the Zoom.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I've got no problem. Your call if you want to send mine to anybody that wants it.
Yeah. Okay. Good deal. The cups have arrived. The most important thing is the coffee. Just to have a little discussion while they're doing that, we ended up at 37, and John's going to tell you this, but we ended up at 37.48 is where we ended up at. When we sent out notices in 2021, we were at 39.52 or 58 or something like that. And we felt pretty comfortable with the, you know, the notices that that we sent out and what have you, and much to our dismay. Good morning, good morning. And so, you know, I'm sorry.
You go over what happened.
Yeah, well, John's going to try to explain how we got to where we're at, and so that'll be real helpful for all of us, I think. Go. Excellent.
All right.
Just make sure you speak up where these guys can hear us okay. And if y'all on Zoom land have questions, you can't hear us or anything, let me know.
All right, John.
All right, so like Steve said, we're here to share the information that we've gathered. And I know that, I've gathered some, talked with Stan and Kelly, and they've got some other information. And I'll be the first one to tell y'all, I don't have all the answers, but there's some things that I've seen, and I'm just sharing it with y'all in case y'all haven't seen it. If there's some things that y'all have seen that none of us bring up, we want to know it, because the more information all of us have, the better chance we have of getting some adjustments made to our study. Jeremy, do we need to just close out of this, or do we need to accept it?
All updates only, and then accept. Had to click the top. And then accept.
All right, so in Hall County, we got our report back. And there was a couple of things as I was looking at it, that I noticed that looked like to me were some problems with the study. And I'm sure that none of them were intentional, that the DOA they just missed some things or just didn't realize. But I've seen some evidence that appears to me that there's a bias in favor of smaller counties with slower growth rates. Now, I know some of y'all are smaller counties in Hall County, and that doesn't mean that every county that's smaller than us, got some favorable treatment. But the counties with slower growth rates tended to not need as much adjustment. I've got some data that kind of shows that. The study, this is something that everybody already knows and everybody's already looked at, and they talk about, since they've been doing it this way. The study is a look forward study. They look at the sales in the year after that we've used to set our values for that year. So we set our values for 20 using 20 sales, and they're looking at 21 values or sales to modify. And there's a couple of problems with that. And none of that is groundbreaking. Everybody's had those discussions before and heard them, but we'll cover a couple of those. There is, and this is something, I've got this question from a couple of different people. Kelly was looking at some information, and I'm sure he probably got something in his presentation where he saw between the end of 20 and the beginning of 21, from December to January, there was a significant change in your ratio. And the study doesn't really take that into account. The majority of values increases occurred also from my information, from what I've seen on our sale, and I've got some data that shows this, and I don't know exactly how the Department of Audits collected or decided what ratio to use, but for the year, I'll show you what our increase was for the year, our percent increase was for the year. But the majority of our increase happened in the first 6 months. There's a spike. First 6 months, values went up, and then it leveled off a little bit. So if they used a yearly increase and just divided it in half for their adjustment, that didn't work because there was a whole lot more adjustment in the first half of the year. The time adjustments allowed to Hall County by the Department of Audits is not supported by the local data, and I can show that as well. 159, and just from the study, 159 counties, of 159 counties, 59.75% fell below 38. Y'all all got your studies, y'all saw that. I just put it in the chart so we could rank them and see which ones and how far they were. Of those 95 that were below 38, 55 counties, 34% of the state was below 36. Only 64 counties, 40% were above the 38 limit. I'll put it on a map. I had one of our GIS technicians put this on the map. I'm not the GIS guy. I didn't do this myself. I gave him the data and put it on. And you can see that there's kind of a cluster here and over here where most of the counties are passing. And later on in some of the other data, that's going to come back, and you can see where that comes into play. One of the things I did, and I found online, is a World Population Review is the site, and give them credit for this. They've ranked all of the Georgia counties by the economic growth for the last 10 years. And I said earlier that the slower growing counties are the ones that pass. by and large. And this is just the data that I've got it. What we did, we pulled it, it's by what percentage they're growing. Forsyth was at the highest at 50%, the lowest was Taliaferro, which actually had a negative growth. However, you pronounce that.
Us North Georgia boys don't know how to pronounce that.
Well, I had a friend who spelled his name the same way back home, and he pronounced it Taliaferro. So I'm from Mississippi, Louisiana, so some of those Louisiana people don't talk right. So anyway, so that's the ranking. There were a few counties, you know, from about here up, well, from here, that were all had negative growth over a 10-year period, according to this website. Only 9, if I put those in order, only 9 counties of the top 25 fastest growing counties, only 9 of them were above 38. So that's 36%. 18 of the lowest counties by growth rate, so all those counties that had negative growth, didn't need as much adjustment. I'm sure, you know, the Department of Audits looked at each county and decided what adjustment to give them, but I don't think they took into account just how big a difference there was between those counties. 18 of the counties in the bottom 25 passed, that's 72%. That's big. If everything's spread out evenly, you would expect to see, just like you would in any kind of ratio study, that it's spread out evenly. You wouldn't expect to see a big cluster at one end or the other. If you do, that usually indicates that you've got a problem with the way that you're looking at the data. 22 counties, if we just look at the median, not the median growth value, but the one in the middle. The 22 counties above the median, so the 22 of the faster growing counties, only 22 were above, so 13%. 41 counties below the median, so 25% below the median growth passed. So it's just, you know, more data to me says that the slower growing counties, for whatever reason in the methodology, had an advantage or received some bias in this study. If you put it on a map, a while ago I told you where those clusters were. You see the clusters, the light colored ones are the ones that passed, or are the ones that are slower growing. And on the previous map, the ones that passed were in this area. The cluster, there were a few spread out through the middle, but the clusters were in this area and this area, which kind of lines up with the slower growing counties, the way they're clustered around the state. Originally, I started looking for and Stan may have this or know where to get it, or Kelly may as well, but I didn't talk to either one of them about it. When I started looking at the growth rates and the population, my original thought was to look at the parcel count, and I found these first. So if you look at it by population, I said smaller counties. I did it the same way, just rank the counties, found the population for each county and ranked them 1 through 159 and put them on a map as well. We got the same kind of data coming out of there. 9, just like it was in the other, of the largest counties by population were over 38%. So it's only 36% of the ones of the largest counties passed the ratio study. 15 of the smallest counties by population were over 38%. So 60, so that kind of lines up with the data from the other. It's still seeing a lot more of the smaller and slower growing counties are passing the study. And it's, you know, nobody did that on purpose. It's just the way the methodology used worked that way. So 25 counties, 15.7% above the median population in the state were over 38, and only 23.9 or 38 below the median, 23.9. So there's still a larger percentage below the median or passing. And once again, when you put it on a map, you see the same correlation. The clusters are in the same area. So it's just, those are slower growing parts of the state. They don't need as much adjustment. The south part, I mean, it's a bunch of timberland and stuff. There's not a lot of new neighborhoods and big developments. There's not a lot of demand for housing or as much in the northern part of the county and on the over towards the coast. There's more going on there. as far as development, that's faster growth, we need a bigger time adjustment than those other counties did. It's not growing as fast. So in Hall County, we got our Department of Audit studies. And the original study they sent us, the original list of sales had 1,859 sales. We went through it, picked out, our invalid sales, just like everybody else does. And when they sent us back the final study, and personally, this is something I know everybody doesn't want to sit here and go through, thousands of sales every year. But I think if you're going to look forward, I don't think a random selection of sales is fair. I think you need to look at all of them, because when you're doing random, it's just kind of up to chance whether or not they randomly pick the good sales or randomly pick the bad sales in their final study, or not bad necessarily, but the ones that are not closer to immediate. So we wound up with 1,523 in our final study. In our appeal, we're going to have a few more of those removed because we've got some sales that should not be in that final study, and that'll help us a little bit. All of the sales used were taken from the first 6 months of 2021 for Hall County. I understand that for some smaller counties, they use 9 months, which is understandable because they just don't have enough sales to work with in that first 6 months. With Hall County, we get on average 500 sales a month, so in 6 months they have plenty of sales to work with. But that does lead to another issue as to whether or not that's fair to use those extra 3 months. I know why they need to do it, but if they're going to do it for the smaller counties, maybe they use a smaller percent from each month, but for the larger counties, use 9 months too, because if those additional sales, and I'll show this a little bit later, happened later in the year, and that growth has kind of leveled off a little bit later in the year, those sales wouldn't need as much adjustment to get your values up. So the smaller counties may have benefited from that a little bit, having those sales that were leveled some after the spike, not need as much adjustment, helped them more than it helped some of the larger counties. And just additionally, like I said, we had about 100 sales included in that final study that we're going to ask to be removed for various reasons. We had some that were partially complete on January 1st, and by the time they sold, it was 100% complete value that it sold for, not partially complete value. And because that's another issue, because that 21st value that they're looking at is a working digest, it's not the final. So this is something that the look forward might miss. And Steve told you, what we finished our ratio off. So when we did our 21 digest, we used, like everybody else, your 20 sales to set your values. And we present at the beginning of the year, or as we start making our adjustments, we present our starting ratio to our board of assessors. So this is what we're starting at. This is what we think we need to do for this year. And we make our adjustments. We give them regular updates right up until the end. Before we send the notices out, we'll give them our final. And when we do our Department of Revenue study, they always ask for those numbers. So our final, when we gave it to them, we started off at about a 35.85 because we dropped from the previous year, because there was a pretty good bit of growth the previous year as well. But our final, we finished off our internal ratio study was 39.53. All of our other numbers were in compliance. We had 5,000 valid sales that we were considering and making those adjustments. We made those adjustments. We had right at 81,000 parcels in Hall County. With those 5,000 sales, and this is something I think that needs to be considered. It's not in their guidelines, and it's something they have to consider. But what they're looking at is to make sure that we did our job, that we weren't sales chasing, that we made adjustments to all our values. But it's nowhere in there is it taken into account. With those 5,000 sales, we changed 66,000 parcels values. The ones that didn't change were the parcels that had 299C on them, maybe some vacant land parcels that hadn't sold or hadn't done anything and no improvements was made on them. We changed over 82% of the values. And we do that every year. We adjust our base raise it up. So we use our sales data from the previous year to make those adjustments. So we've done everything that we're supposed to do to make sure we're at market value. Now, Kelly and Stan, they talk about trending. I'm not going to get into trending too much. But when we make that value change, we make that value change for the entire year. So if you look at it from a standpoint of trending or time adjustments, our value, that end of the year value that we're setting for January 1st is really kind of the average value for the year, middle of the year value, if you want to look at it that way. So but we did what we were supposed to do with the sales. We went through the county, adjusted all our values and made our change. The Department of Audit states that they allowed a 14.5% time adjustment. I backed into that time adjustment from theirs. So they did allow us 14.5. We're off on some of ours by about 0.01. And I think that's a rounding issue between my Excel and whatever program they use. We will be asking the Department of Audits to give us a little bit more time adjustment based on our current market and the local sales data. I've got an article that I pulled up from Georgia Realtors, GeorgiaRealtor.com, if anybody wants to go look at it. And it's stated that's a pretty good organization. They put stuff out there every year and they seem to know what they're talking about. But it said for the state of Georgia, the median sales price increased by 18%. And the median sales price across the state of Georgia is $295. The average sales price increased by 17% to $352. Our own data in Hall County shows, and they did go on that article did go on to say that there are some parts of the state that have different growth rates than other parts of the state. The highest was around 25%, the lowest was around 16%. If I remember correctly. But our own sales data tells us that in Hall County, our average sale price went up 21%, somewhere between 21% and 25%. And I say that because it depends on how you look at it. If I only look at residential parcels, it went up a little over 21%. If I look at all sales, it went up 25%, 25.5, 25.59, so 25.6. From 20 to 21, so our increase in 21 was that much over what 20 was. And our own median increase was 18.56%. If anybody, I pulled all that data out of our system using SQL, so in our sales data, you can do if you don't want Wingate County, you can run your ratio and throw it into an Excel spreadsheet and do the math there as well to come up with the same kind of answers. And I told you earlier that at the beginning of the year, there was a spike. And it kind of leveled off a little bit at the second half of the year. So the increase for the first part of the year was greater than the increase for the second part of the year. So our own internal data tells us, and I've got the average sale price from the previous couple of years so that I can gather. So our average increase for 20 was 8%. For 21, it was 21% for the whole year. And this is the unfiltered, that if I pull all sales, it's 25.59%. If I only look at the sales in the first 6 months of the year, it's 18.92% was the increase. So of a 21% increase, almost 19% of it happened in the first 6 months. So I'm not sure, somebody else may know more about how the Department of Audit calculates that study, what they're going to give us. But if my increase was 18.92%, I don't think a 14.5% adjustment was the adjustment we should have received, for the first 6 months, because those sales are higher than the sales from the previous year by that much. See the same thing when we look at all the sales unfiltered, not just looking at residential sales. The increase was 21.37% in the first 6 months of a total of 25% over the year. And that's the value at that point over the previous year's value. So that's not a percentage of how much it went for the year, but the average value of sales in the first 6 months was 21% higher than it was in the previous year. The yearly median increase was 18.56. You see again, if you just look at the 6 months, first 6 months of sales, it was already, the median was up 14.45% and 14.4 overall. We talked about there being a significant decrease. You always see a decrease. You finish off your ratio study, and then, you know, you start getting some sales in for the first year, for the next year, you run your ratio study and you've dropped. You know, you're using the same sale base, you know, in an increasing market, that's what you expect to see. You're going to drop. This year, a little bit more significant drop than we've had in years past. And what I did, and I know we've talked about this some, is went back and instead of looking at the whole year, just look at the previous months. So in October, our median ratio for the month of October, not looking at any sales outside of that, just the sales in October of 20, we were at 38.8. November, it decreased a little bit, 38.77. December, 38.21. That's all what you expect to see. Our final for the entire year, 39.53. But in an increasing market, you expect to see your ratio go down a little bit as your values go up. January, using the same value system in our Canvas system in WinGap, we had the same values on all these properties. Looking at the new sales, we hadn't updated or changed any schedules. It dropped in 1 month from 38.21 to 36.10. I mean, that's a significant drop. I mean, that's what, 10% adjustment to move 2 points like that. So I look back and I told you this is looking forward now into 21. So we saw the significant drop between December and January. So we look forward into 21, looking at the sales study as we go through the year. The first 6 months of the year, from here to here, we have a 4.7% drop in our ratio study before we make any adjustments to any tables or values. For the rest of the year, we only have another 2.8%. So most of the change happened in the first 6 months. So between the first 6 months of the year and that December and January, we're at a 6.83 drop from what we finished off in December. So there again, just more an indication that the adjustment needs to be based on the sales. If they're using 6 months of sales, needs to be based on what that change was in the first 6 months. At least to me, that seems to be would be fair because those are the sales are great and some. The time. So if you're doing a time adjustment, y'all all probably already know how to do a time adjustment. If you don't, you didn't know how to do a time adjustment. Just real quick, the math is you have your time adjustment factor that you're going to do. You divide that by the number of days in the period that you're adjusting for. In this case, it's half the year. And I think that may be where I'm off with the Department of Audits a little bit, because I did 365 divided by 2. And I think they may have just said 180, 6 months. So that would account for about 0.01 off on some of that. And that's going to give you a daily factor. You also need the number of days you're going to adjust by, which I call the adjustment days. So that would be your sale date minus the assessment date, in this case, January 1st. So sale date minus January 1st. And then because we're working backwards to get your adjustment factor, which is going to be applied to each sale, it's 1 minus the daily factor times the adjustment days. So you get your daily factor, your adjustment days, multiply those, subtract them from 1. That's going to give you your adjustment factor that gets used on each parcel or on each sale. And then to get your adjusted ratio is your adjustment factor times the original sales value, gives you your adjusted sale value. And then from there, you just do your ratio study just like you normally would. And everybody, I'm sure that's in here knows how to do a ratio study. So where that comes into play, these are actually some of the sales that we had in our study. All right. So as we make our time adjustments, those sales that happen later in the year, later in the time period, that time adjustment is going to have a higher impact on them. And this is where that extra 3 months for the smaller counties may have been an advantage to them if the right time adjustment factor was used, where it wasn't to some of the larger counties. Because you can see those sales that happened in January, they only got a couple of days worth of adjustment on them. And they don't change the ratio by very much. So if that sale, was at a 38.9, 38.68 over there, that January sale only went to 38.9. Didn't change very much. This is 14.5% they gave us. But this sale down here that was a 33.97, it moved 5.49 points. So it went all the way up to 39.46. So you can imagine if you go another 3 months and add some more days, now you've got to change your factor because you're adding days to your adjustment period. So you got to remember to do that. So your daily factor is going to change a little bit. But just to demonstrate, I just went in and changed a couple of these to different, put them further out, added more days to them, added that 3 months to them. They changed, you can see that they changed by even more than all the other ones did. So even with the adjusted factor, they still went up over 5.5% or 5.5 points from the original value. So the further out you go with those adjustments, the better increase. And a little side note, if you're doing your ratio study, if y'all haven't already figured this out, which most of you probably have, low sales that are in January hurt you more than low sales at the end of the study. High sales at the end of the study hurt you more than high sales in January because the adjustment's not going to have as much impact on them. So price-wise, when looking for your invalid sales, you want to get them all out, of course, but those are the ones I prioritize. That's all I have. If anybody has any questions or comments or see something I did wrong that they think we should do a different way, I am open to suggestions because like I said, I don't know everything and I'm here to learn from y'all as much as just to share the information that I have. Let you navigate to yours. Somebody got any questions?
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Thank y'all. Thank y'all for putting this on. Thank you, Steve and John. Thanks for everybody here and online. I think we're all kind of in the same boat. We're here because of this study that was performed and came out by the audit department. But I thought, please excuse my PowerPoint. I didn't have a whole lot of time to put this together. John's is I wish you'd let me go on first because yours was a lot prettier than mine. But I'm Stan. I work with a company called GMAS, for those of you that may not know me, and we represent several counties across the state. And we've had this past year, we've had several of our counties fail their audit study that we're ongoing an appeal currently. And that's why we were requested to come, because we may have seen or had additional data to kind of share with you guys. And I'm happy to share anything we have, but we're in the same boat y'all are. Kind of shocked that our internal studies are completely different than the audit study, but no, not trying to say that the audit department is doing it incorrectly. It's just a different study that they're performing. But I wanted to go through a quick history of how we all got here, because this is not something new. This, in my opinion, has been an issue for several years now. I think it's just now becoming relevant because a lot of folks failed and they assumed they wouldn't. In the past, it worked right the opposite. The audit department's ratios were actually better than our internal ratios, or somewhat closer to our internal ratios. So it really wasn't a concern. But let's go back. Prior to 2000, the Department of Revenue was the one that performed the ratio studies. They taught us, they audited us, and we mirrored that test that they were doing for us. And in that study, they looked at 1 year's worth of sales, January to December 31st, January 1st to December 31st. But at the same time, the audit department also performed their own analysis, but it was primarily for the QBE distributions. The DOR criteria again was just 12 months worth of sales, and they we were in sync with their study. Sometime around 2000, I don't know the exact date. Some of y'all that are a lot older than me, that's been in this business longer than me, may know the exact date. The DOR stopped performing the ratio studies and accepted the DOA study as their study for the digest purposes. And that was used when we submit our digest, whether we passed or failed, and whether we get a conditionally approved digest or put under a consent order. But also that ratio is applied to what we can bill or assess the public utility properties. In some counties, it's really not a big deal, but some counties, that's a major portion of their digest. 2007 and 8, we had the housing crash, as everybody was aware. And in 2010, Senate Bill 346 was passed, which statutorily locked assessments at the sale price. If our assessments were greater than the sale price, it locked that assessment at the sale price for 1 year. So if you're using those in a study, your ratio wouldn't be greater than a 40 ratio. However, internally, most counties that I'm in or GMAS is involved in, we don't even use that statutory number in our assessments or in our analysis. That's just an assessment amount. So I think everybody shares the same concern. Why can't we use our internal values and not the assessments? Well, in 2011, the DOAA changed their design of their ratio studies to include sales after January 1st of that tax digest year that they were auditing. And shortly after that, or around about that same time, again, I'm not certain on the exact date, that Attorney General's opinion about considering sales that are statutorily locked by Senate Bill 346, it was their opinion that those sales should not be considered. So therefore, the audit department, sometime in 12 or 13, changed their design again to only consider sales beyond that digest year, because they were prohibited from using sales prior to that. Now, again, we share, I think, a similar concern is why can't you use our internal values and do that study and not that statutorily locked value? Today, the differences in the county ratio study and the audit department study have just been highlighted more than it has been in the past. Like I said, the issue is that in the past, it was to our favor. Now, with this super hyperinflated market, it's not in our favor. So our dilemma is, should the assessors change their sales ratio study to reflect how the audit department are studying it? You would think if that's the standard that we're trying to pass, that we should change our method to mirror the audit department's method. And what sales range is more reflective of January 1st, the effective date of all of our assessments? Also, no DOR or GAO policy, rules, regulations that instruct or guide the assessors on how to change their studies if one is needed. And I'm not saying that we should, I'm just saying that's the thoughts. You know, if somebody's grading our analysis, we need to mirror that system. Also, if you look at most CAMA systems that we use, their default ratio analysis is 1 year time frame. And as the DOAA ratios continue to be formed and accepted, the same issues with the study existed. However, the ratio studies were usually a similar results to our internal studies, if not better. So again, no harm, no foul. The only time the DOAA studies and the county studies appear to be drastically different is when there's a major change in the market from one year to the next. And so we're facing now in several of our counties, matter of fact, I think it's over half of our counties that we just went through a reevaluation to get them up to par, up to standards, up to fair market value. More than half of those have failed statewide. Now, that may impact some of the contracts we have, but I'm more concerned on some of the chief appraisers' positions where this may have an impact on their jobs. I think we can search and always be in this business in some aspect, whether it's valuing properties or defending properties or just in a support situation, but it has really impacted our appraisals and analysis because what we're telling the counties one thing and then their audit study is telling them something else. We've noticed this going into counties that they've requested us to analyze their data and tell us where we're wrong or what we need to fix. So we'll come in to their office, do an analysis and say, look, your internal study says that you're going to fail your ratios this year. You need to, do a reevaluation. And that's a selling point for our company. But it was true. I mean, it's the data it's their data. It's not data that we're interjecting into that study. But then at the end of their audit study, they passed. But internally, they're failing. So it hadn't made sense for us in a while. But again, it didn't hurt anybody from our point of view. I mean, we passed ratio, no consent orders, no conditionally approved digest. We got to bill our public utilities at 40%. Everybody's happy. But now that we're failing, again, it's the same issue. It's just a different end result. So in 1995, there's a court case, Bell South, Henry County. I thought for years that was law, that if your ratio study is below 38, and I guess it is technically law because it came from a court ruling, but I thought that was in the law book somewhere. I had to get what I call him, Lawman Lloyd, to look that up. But there was a public utility court case regarding if our final assessment is below 38, we have to assess the public utilities at that assessment level. And then another dilemma is what percentage of time adjustment? And I think John done a good example of that. We're happy to share our PowerPoints, our slides here with y'all if you can't see it. But, a time adjustment, you've got a lot of assumptions there that you're assuming, one, that market is continuing in that same direction constantly from month to month. When if you look at any real estate data, they tell you June and July are the peak of the market for home buying anyway, the real estate. But so we have a dilemma. Do we use that same time adjustment formula to all the sales? Well, I promise you, if you do that, John's already noted, if you do that same time adjustment for all future sales, at some point, you're going to come up with negative values. And what sales are being clipped from this audit study? Because from our analysis in all of the counties, it's greater than 50% of the sales in that time frame are being clipped. So if you're not using all the sales, you're not really seeing a true analysis. I think you need to study both markets. It's my opinion, and I think GMAS's opinion, that the best sales to consider if your effective date is January 1st are those sales closest to January 1st, before and after. I don't disagree with using future sales. I think it shows the market. A sale that sold January or February of 21, and we're talking about the 21 study, to me is more relevant than a sale that sold January or February of 2020. So I'm not in disagreement that we shouldn't use future sales. The issue is how can we use the future sales when, this might not be an issue in some of our smaller counties where we can wait until the last date to mail notices, but in these larger counties, it's just impossible because of the process to mail the notices, to submit your digest on time. You're not going to be able to see any of these sales that's being used in this study. You could probably enter sales that occurred in January or February, but you get into March and April when you're trying to lock down your digest to send out notices to get everything in line for that digest submission. It's an unknown. We're supposed to be, fortune tellers of what that market's going to do. It could change it weekly. It changes, much less monthly or annually. So what time adjustment? What sales are being clipped? What's the local adjustment factor that's being used to audit and study our commercial and industrial versus our residential? There's local adjustments to commercial cost schedules that's been developed from a residential market. I don't think any appraiser would agree that the commercial and industrial market is the same as a residential or agricultural market. I think they all have their own changes. Let's see, the market in the north part of the county is drastically different in the south part of the county where I live. Now, I don't work, and I'm not speaking on behalf of Dawson County, but I live in Dawson County, and I know personally, because I'm in the real estate market there looking for a home myself, that the north part of the county, up in the mountains towards Amaclola, is completely different than the south part of Dawson County down by the lake, Lake Lanier. And I'm sure it's the same in y'all's county. I know all the counties that's represented here, your county is different from one end to the next. And so if you're using the same time adjustment on these sales, even for the same class of property, I think some could argue there's a flaw with that. And especially if you're using the same time adjustment on those sales of different classes of property from north to the south of the county. So there's some issues. This is not a mathematical formula that's going to give you an exact answer. That's why it's called an appraisal. It's an opinion. It's a range of numbers. What's the most reflective of our market? I don't think you can just track a formula, because I promise you apply that time adjustment all the way out, and I've done it on a couple of counties, you come up with negative numbers. It just doesn't make sense. At some point, you have to step back and look, what's reasonable? We know the value of our counties because we're there every day. We qualify the sales. We value those properties. We spent the last year arguing and defending those at the BOEs, at hearing officers. We've got data that backs up our numbers, and all those that were involved, from the legislative side to the judicial side of our business, agree in our own counties that we're right on the money. Yet we get this study that says, whoa, you didn't do your job right. So it is a huge concern, I think. But I think we have to press pause and look at, how did we get here? Well, we got here back when the DOR accepted the DOAA study. If the DOAA study is not the same study that we're using internally, there's a disconnect there of why that occurred, because we definitely can't conform to that. We can't change our internal processes to mirror what the audit study is, because we can't enter those sales in time and do the analysis and mail the notices in time. And again, what's being clipped and those adjustment factors. My biggest concern is what this study, if it's not created or done by the audit department, if it's not primarily for our digest submission to grade and audit the county's performance on uniformity, equity, bias, if that's not the intent of the study, what is the intent of the study? We've gotten word that it's primarily done for the school system, school funding, school distributions, this QBE distribution across the state. And so I'm not an expert on that by no means. And I hope maybe some of the slides that you or speakers you hear can shed some light on that. But in my opinion, if it's the same goal, same point, what's the true fair market value January 1st of your digest, regardless of what the study is for, it should be the same result or a very similar result. So I'm going to fast forward through some of these slides in the beginning. I put here for your reference just to show you that what the audit department is doing is complying with the law. There's nothing they're doing that's against the law. Now, we might not like that result, and we may have some individual issues or arguments that we could bring up in our appeal to address, a time adjustment or some sales that we're going to ask them to kick out, or maybe some sales that we're going to ask them to consider. But what the audit department is doing is completely by the book. So I've listed here in the law where it's giving the DOAA direction, authority, to do what they're doing. And so I'm going to skip that process. But here I wanted to point out any such sales price shall be adjusted upward or downward in a manner consistent with the standards on ratio studies published by the IAAO. And I think that's important to understand where is the DOAA's formula for what they're doing. And first, I would say just call Lee. I've heard he's a super nice guy. I look forward to meeting him. I met him one time down at Lake Blackshear at the GAAO event. Super nice guy. I think he'd be receptive to sitting down and talking with you. And I hope that once everybody appeals and we go to those meetings, or if he comes to us, I've heard that he's going to be actually coming to us. So we think that's a plus in some of our counties to save them to drive. But he's going to come and sit with us and go over our concerns, analysis. So I hope that will be the end of the appeal. Again, I think it might be a bigger concern across the statewide when you look at all the counties that have failed and the issues that each county is going to bring up. I think it's more of a statewide method or issue on how this is performed and why it's performed. So the audit department basically is going by the book, by the law. The Department of Revenue here in their rules and regulations 56011.2.56, given the state auditor to accept their assessment analysis, their assessment ratio. And here, the Department of Revenue instructs the application of the sales ratio. It says the appraisal staff shall conduct the sales ratio. Such studies shall be designed to measure where appraisals meet the overall legal standards provided by Rule 56011.2.56. Make sure your studies adhere to that. To provide more precise analysis of the quality of appraisals within and between market strata used by the appraisal staff to compare properties. The BOA shall review and document annual sales ratios generated before and after value changes have been made. The review should be noted in the Board of Assessors minutes, and the actual sales ratios reviewed should be attached and embedded in the BOA minutes. Sales ratios should be presented and ran by property class. Additional sales ratios by neighborhood or subdivisions could be present as well. So I hope that everybody's adhering to that. Continue to do what you're doing. Perform your ratios like we've always performed them. Make sure you have adequate ratios that comply with the rules and regulations by the Department of Revenue. Recurring sales, again, this is by the Department of Revenue. This is out of course 1A. Recurring sales on the same property over a period of time can be studied to demonstrate the percentage of increase in value as indicated by the required degree of adjustment to maintain property assessment levels. But here it states ratio study only gives you during some given period of time. It doesn't say January 1st to December 31st. That's just a rule of thumb I think we've kind of inherited over the years from the revenue department performing those analyses. I've heard some BOE members, when I go to present my case at a BOE hearing, won't allow me to present data that occurred after January. And I questioned that because I thought, well, now wait a minute, you're the hearing body. You can't tell me the evidence I can or can't use. You know, you can choose not to consider my evidence, but I can provide you, you know, any kind of evidence that you should consider. But some BOEs in this state won't allow you to present sales or market data that occurred after January 1st. I just found that crazy. And then it also states here, for instance, all sales within a county in 1 year. So, I mean, there's no law that says we're to use sales that occurred in 1 year, but this is just the for instance. And it just states here in the training material that during some period of time, there's no requirement, there's no law that dictates what sales range you should use as assessors. And the median ratio, that will be the ratio for the median central tendency that the revenue commissioner will use.
Hey, Stan, what is being taught in the BOE classes?
I'm
Do you
not
know?
privy to those
Any idea?
BOE classes,
Okay.
but I would imagine, because I do have some fellas that used to teach that that's not what's been taught or shouldn't be taught. Honestly, this is Stan's opinion, not GMAX's. I just feel like that's been kind of instructed to them maybe by some of the folks from the assessor side. Now, don't get mad at me. I've argued that in the past myself. Well, we can't use those. We didn't have that information at the time. You know, in my defense, what's best for me, you know, trying to represent my side. I think that's just the product, the evolution of the BOE and the BOA working together closely over the years.
So
they understand, the BOE understands our predicament where we don't have that information at the time, but that doesn't mean that evidence isn't relevant. Just because we didn't know that sale occurred doesn't mean it's not relevant.
well, we all know in past how we were taught. You know, that as far as our valuation date is January 1st. And that's law, as in all books.
Don't get ahead of me, it's coming up.
Yeah, I know, but January 1st. And so I think that's where it comes from. You know, January 1st, this is the value. You can't use anything past January 1st, you know, to use as evidence for that January 1st date. And so
I'm not
in that
disagreeing with
case-
you, I understand
Well,
where
yeah,
that
I know
came
you
from.
do, but I'm just saying, you know, as far as us defending values at BOE or even the sales ratio with the audit department. I mean, how can we use something that's in the future to defend something as of January 1st is the question.
Well, your only argument at that point is we didn't have or know about that information.
Well, And
That
that's the
doesn't
case.
mean we're right. It doesn't mean we're wrong.
Right,
It's just we didn't have that information. The BOE can determine whether they want to consider that information or not.
right. And getting off the BOE, let's go to the audit department. Okay, if by law, we're supposed to value things as of January 1st. How can they?
Don't get ahead of me.
Okay, all right.
Let me get through the slides and I'll open it up
Okay.
for questions,
That's fine.
because you're bringing up a great point. That's where I'm going with this. There is no law. However, there's other laws that affect this study. And so we'll get there. Just
Okay.
hang tight.
That's all.
So during some period of time, this is by the state auditor, who has full control of that time period that they're going to choose to use in their ratios, just like you guys have authority to use some given time period. Any such sales price adjusted upward or downward in a manner consistent with the IAAO. So I think it's important, if you're concerned with this study by the audit department, to understand the IAAO's position on ratio analysis. And then the representative number of parcels of each class of property as defined by the commissioner used for the study shall be determined by the auditor. He clearly has authority and power to pick and choose the time and the samples. So I've highlighted here some IAAO publications. This is out of the Standards for Sales Ratio Studies, which was published in 2013. And this is the guidance section for local jurisdictions. A ratio study cannot provide perfect information about appraisal performance. And I just want to get that engraved in your head. You didn't do anything wrong. You haven't done anything wrong. It's just 2 points of view. There are some issues I want to address in this, in the method that's being used by the audit department, but I hope to address that with Lee, and I'm certain that he'd be acceptance of that. States here, guidance for local jurisdictions, that the larger the sample size, the greater the reliability. Again, it doesn't say an amount, it just says a larger size. Date of analysis. Well, in Georgia, that's January 1st. There's no acceptance of that. The period from which sales are drawn, this period depends on the purpose of the study. I would argue their purpose and our purpose should be the same purpose, same goal. What's the value of the property, your county, January 1st? In general, the period should be as short as possible and ideally no more than a year. Well, I would encourage you to come to some of our counties that don't have enough sales sample in 1 year of one class or strata of property, that you have to go back and use multiple years. Again, equalization and performance monitoring, the date of analysis, the sales. So this first paragraph is really explaining to audit or analyze sale chasing when prior year assessments are used to gauge current performance to avoid sale chasing. But if you look at the second paragraph, if the purpose of this study is equalization, a sales period spanning the appraisal date can be used if measures are taken to ensure the independence of appraisals made after the earlier sales. This approach has an advantage of reducing the importance of time adjustments. So basically, if you use sales before and sales after your effective date, this can be used, and it has an advantage of reducing the need for a time adjustment. Sales validation guidelines, adjustments for time. Time adjustments may be based on market analysis and supported with appropriate documentation. Now, I'm certain the audit department has their documentation. So I'm sure you're not going to find any errors in their calculations. If you took their samples and done the same calculations that they performed, I don't think your argument in this appeal should be the calculations. I don't think you're going to find any errors in that. I think the only points that you're going to try to insert here is the sample size, the sample range, and possibly the time adjustment applied. That to me seems to be the only case you would have. There's going to be a handful of sales, like I said earlier, that you may get kicked out or thrown in. But ultimately, I don't know that that's going to affect the overall ratio properly. Valid time adjustment techniques are as follows: tracking sales and appraisal ratios over time. Most of us do that, including date of sale as a variable in regression or feedback models. I don't do that. Analyzing resales, we do that. Comparing per unit values over time in a homogeneous strata or neighborhoods, such as subdivisions or condominiums, we do that. Isolating the effect of time through paired sales analysis, we do that just like John had shown. Statistically supported time trend analysis studies. Again, we don't do a whole lot of that because we're using that span of sales. I think personally, and it's Stan's opinion, that using those sales that span this approach has an advantage. So why wouldn't you use an approach that has an advantage? Sales validation guidelines: if sales prices have generally been rising, ratios for sales that occurred after the assessment date tend to understate the overall level of appraisals. And then changes in prices should be monitored and time adjustments made by geographic areas and type of properties. Again, that was my whole argument of you can't just use one blanket time adjustment in your county when your county is drastically different or may be drastically different from one end to the next, also amongst property classes and strata.
Can I ask a question of the group? Does anybody ask to leave for the time adjustments?
But well, you can request that from Lee, and he'll give you the spreadsheets and all to use. And if it's not stated there, it's easily identifiable. Yeah, just
Class, so,
Yes.
in vacant versus the group.
yes. Oversight agencies can make an appropriate time adjustment after making all other adjustments. Again, this is all IAAO standards. When this came out, I remember like it was yesterday because I'm old. And in 2013, Todd Pascal was the director there, and he did a presentation for the GAAO up at Unicorn. And everybody was up in arms about this new method that they're using on their ratio studies, using sales that from the future. It was a big ordeal. I remember it. I mean, we were arguing, whoa, we was up there with pitchforks and tar and feathers. No, you can't do this. So I pulled a couple of slides I found that was interesting from that PowerPoint, and he stated at the time that there's 3 reasons that this audit study is performed. One, to monitor local appraisal performances for accuracy and uniformity. That's our main concern, I would think. 2, to establish public utility assessment levels. But 3, produce equalized adjustment property tax digest for the QBE funding formula. And he had stated there that this, at the time in 13, had over a $2 billion impact statewide. And he had put that question at the bottom of that slide: which should have the most influence on the ratio design? I found that to be an odd question at the time, because my thought was, shouldn't the results for all 3 of those studies be the same result? if you're trying to establish what's the market value of your county at the time, why wouldn't all those three have equal weight or the same goal? Why would the design of the ratio be changed to benefit one of these other cases? And that's where I think the bigger issue here is not so much, hey, give you an example. We're facing in a county, well, it's Union County, because that's the example I'm going to show here, but we're in several counties, but the examples on this slide are from Union. We're facing about a $40,000 public utility revenue loss if we accept the ratio as it stands, and potentially losing a contract and a conditionally approved digest when we do our digest submission. But talking with the school superintendent, and I believe he's online watching now, they're facing millions in revenue loss because of this digest being inflated. And it just didn't make sense to me that why would a county want to go through a reevaluation if they're gaining $40,000, get to accept your digest and mail tax bills, but we're losing millions over here by what we're doing to try to make the values correct. It just didn't make sense to. And I don't know that that's the case, and I hope to find out some of those answers today, but also when we speak with Lee. But again, my point was, in my opinion, those three reasons for that should be the same. It also stated, and you got to remember back then, we were talking about a decline in property values, a huge decline from the housing crash. But this was his slide. It's not fair to analyze sales after the date of assessment because counties did not use these sales when developing their appraisal schedules. The assessment ratios will be overly affected by declining property values after the first year. Well, now it's right the opposite. We're facing super inflated values. So this was my first analysis of the study when it came out on the 4th. I just went back the last 3 years of all the audit studies statewide. 60% of them, it's the same data that John shared earlier, but I saw that 60% of these counties were below a 38 ratio. And I thought, wow, that seems huge. I hadn't never analyzed that before or had any concern, but hey, I'm a GIS wizard. Let's go in here and just see what happens and see, you know, how has it been in the past? Well, in 2020, only 36%, and in 2019, only 11%. And we've got some data now that we're going to trend that back further. But if you look at how many below 36, that's failing. This is public utility loss, but 35% of those were less than a 36 ratio. I mean, you're talking 96 counties out of 159. Something didn't smell right. So if you look at the 19, these are the counties highlighted that were below a 36 in red and below a 38 in orange. And then you look at 2020, you get a little more, but looking at 2021, it has exploded. And I thought, no way, because a lot of those are our counties. There's no way. I've never failed a ratio study in my life since I've been in the business. And so it was shocking. Intentionally anyways, I don't think I have, not after a revow.
Has anybody talked with Lee and had this discussion?
Well, we have going through our appeals process, and yes, this will all be shared with him. And like I said, he's a super nice guy. I'm sure he'll be receptive to our concerns. But I don't know, you know, we may go there and end our appeal and get our ratio that we can be satisfied or live with. But I think there's bigger concerns here statewide, more than just your personal digest. I think I heard a comment.
That's the point.
You know, a lot of the counties aren't appealing because they passed. True, if we had passed all of ours, I'm not so sure I could have talked those counties into appealing. But the only way we can get the ball rolling is to get the appeals filed to address the bigger issue here. That the study, in our opinion, from what we do and why we do it, seems to be flawed. No, not saying the audit study and Lee, what they're doing is wrong. I'm just saying to do what we're doing compared to what they're doing seems to be flawed to some point when you have this that occurred. And it's only highlighted now. But this is something that's been highlighted to us as a company for years, going back to when it was changed, when it was redesigned. So that chart, the map, kind of led me back to our GAAO, the COVID impact study, when I had several counties' data across the state and showing trends of home sales, the average change in market values from one year to the next. And this is from 17 to 18, and this was from 18 to 19. We'll get back to that North Georgia area in a minute, in the South Coastal. And this is from 19 to 20. Everybody, but this small little county here had a huge increase in market values. 11% statewide average. That's average, but some of these were showing in excess of 20 to 25% increases from one year to the next. John just showed his analysis last year that showed around that amount. And it appears from our studies that any county with a lake, any county with the mountains, smaller towns, coastal Georgia, something that draws people that they can work from home and have a beautiful town that's not so crowded outside of the Atlanta traffic, seems to be the hottest market in the state right now. And the hottest or the largest percentages of increases in digest in our reevaluations occurred going up 515, starting with Ellijay all the way to Hiawassee. It's just ridiculous at the market explosion up there. But I know everybody has seen it across the state. Every county I go into is, whoa, this is crazy. You won't believe what, look at these. So this is the example I'm giving y'all is one county, but we're seeing this statewide. Some not so extreme, but this is Union County, and this is our internal ratio studies showing in 18, 19, and 20, pre our reevaluation, pre our contract there, they were failing internal ratio studies in all areas. We performed the reevaluation to get their values up between 38 and 40. And just a little trade secret, we try not to hit 40. We want to be slightly below that. Get us around 39, I'll be happy. But so we want to be between that, what I call the sweet spot, the 38 to 40. And we felt like, improved with our information to the boards, that we got them there and we passed internally, 21 and 22. These are the digest changes. From 2020 to 2021, we went up 33% on average. For residential properties, which was the bulk of the digest, went up 35% in 1 year. You can imagine the appeals. We're still fighting those appeals. But this was our digest this year. After going up 35% on residential properties, we had to go up again another 25% just to keep up with that inflated market. So this was to get them up to par and up to market value with known deficiencies. But a good indicator, in my opinion, is now that I know what market value is and I can compare it again, that would be my change in the market over 1 year. I think our market saw a 25% increase in Union County last year. Then we get our audit ratio and we're at a 33.7.
Too low, Stan.
I thought, whoa, wait, no. So I don't know about y'all. We got the list of sales from our Department of Audit appraiser, anonymous, and we addressed our concerns across the state like everybody else. Whoa, 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 whoa. This is showing we're going to fail horribly. Oh, don't worry. Don't worry. There's going to be some trimming, extreme trimming. We're going to do some time adjustment. You'll be all right. You'll be all right. Are you doing your job? Yes, sir. You would be all right. I just felt like I got hoodwinked. I mean, wait a minute, which one of y'all kidding? You know? So, so we're going through and we failed everything. Everything. On one of the, what I considered one of the best reevaluations we've ever done internally. No offense, we did a good one everywhere we go. So basically what this study was stating is that based on our proposed digest versus the DOAA corrected digest, that they're going to increase the net worth of Union County by $863 million. Didn't mean anything to me. I could care less, but I just knew that that's not right. When we went up 35% on residential properties, they want us to go up another 19% in that year, knowing that we went up another 25%, but
Good luck.
then we should have had a 52% increase. No. So you look at the DOAA studies and our studies, and look, this is not any shot at the DOAA and Lee again. I'll circle back around and we'll hug and shake hands afterwards, I'm sure. But if you notice the sample size that's being performed and used in the dotted study versus our sample size, 41%, 40, 31, 23, 11%. Now that was probably due to COVID. There were some issues there, the shutdowns. Nobody really knew what the market was going to do. They used 38% of our samples to do the study. So you're using half of the sales that occurred, number one. But two, our internal ratios, we did the reval for 2021 because we knew we failed. But look at this audit sample. They stated we passed, the county had passed in those prior years, but failed horribly in the year that we corrected it. Now, at the same time, the market did increase, but the market was increasing in 19. COVID just shot it out of the roof. So in 20, it hyperinflated, and now in 2021 and 2022, it's continuing that. We're seeing some signs now of a slowdown. But I just knew that just doesn't sound right. It doesn't look right. It doesn't feel right. It hurts. And it's not just in this county. It's in most of our counties, the same scenario. I thought maybe this is isolated to me. Maybe just our Department of Audit appraisers just had it out for me or something, or, you know, I took it personal. I'm sure everybody did when you first got it. Oh, but it's not. Don't take it personal. This is the market there in Union County, and you can see the gray bar, the number of sales, but the blue bar, the actual average sale price of home sales versus the average assessments at the time. There was some change here trying to get it up some, but our reevaluation is what caught them up to market value. And you can see it's still super inflated for this year. And we tracking sales like everybody, it's going to continue. It's staying that same course from the sales that we've entered so far to now. And I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen that same data too. But if you look at your commercial and industrial, or if you look at vacant land, none of those charts and graphs look anything close to what your residential homes are. We've seen that if you put a house on it, or if you can spend the night in it and use the restroom, so it doesn't matter what it is, it's super inflated in the value. But vacant land, rural land, commercial and industrial, it's not moving the same amount. I'm not saying your county is not, but overall statewide from our analysis in our counties, it doesn't seem to be the same market. So I thought, well, there's something flawed in my data. I go outside of my data and I pull up, this is from Georgia MLS, but you've got some local MLS data, real estate data. John had brought up some earlier, but this was saying between 2020 and 2021, January to December, the average sale price had changed almost 7% from 19 to 20. But then from 2020 to 2021, the average sale price went up 27%. So I thought, well, okay, that's got some validity to my analysis. Maybe I'm not wrong. The median up 22%. So I looked at, well, 6 months before and 6 months after. Again, that's my opinion of the best reflected of the market as of January 1st. Not that we can or should use that, but that's just my opinion. Don't get mad. But from 6 months before and after, the average was 23, almost 24%. So I think this is where we're at, where the counties are using the 12 months before, or either they're using all 12 months before, and maybe the couple of months using your future year sales or whatever you may get and be able to consider some of the sales that occurred the next year, January or February, maybe even March or April. That's the county's sample. When in the green there, that's Stan's opinion of the true reflection of the market, but there's no way that the assessors will be able to consider those samples. And then what the DOAA sample size here is the first 9 months in 21. So everybody understands you change your sample, you're going to have a different ratio. And so we had before and after ratios that proved our case time and again. We did, and I even in our BOA minutes that we used April 1 to April 1 because that was all the sales that we had entered at the time. We were trying to consider those future sales. We were trying to mimic the best we could the audit study. If they're being graded, if they're the ones that's grading us on our performance, I want to change our model to mirror that if it's a true reflection of market value. Whoops. So this is the samples that we got from the audit study of the sales that they were using, and I broke them out by digest, class, and strat. And I noticed here, on average, it was about a 10% time adjustment that was applied, but that was equated to close to a 2%, 1 to 2% time adjustment per month. If I look at, now these are average numbers, when I look at our actual sales that occurred, the actual of homes and the difference from 1 year to the next, we get about a 23% time adjustment from our actual data. And so please forgive this drawing. This is just my over quick thrown together PowerPoint, but I compared our digest from 2021 versus our current digest that we just mailed notices out, that I knew from my own data and analysis, this was a true market change in Union County. And it's not just in Union. We're also working in several counties up there. So we had data from those adjacent counties that stated about the same thing. So it was reasonable, in my opinion, that that market went up 23%. When the time adjustment applied by the audit department was only about 10%. And if you applied the proper time adjustment, it's about where I thought we should be, about a 39 ratio. And so using that math, we're going to be losing about $40,000 in public utility revenue and a conditionally approved digest if it's not changed or accepted as it is. We even grouped it by different neighborhoods, the DOAA analysis by our county analysis by neighborhood, and you can see if a proper time adjustment was applied to those sales that he's using, we probably would have been somewhere around a 40 ratio. I'll take a 40. 39 is okay. I would be happy with a 38.5, you know. But from our actual data, about half or double the amount of sales just using the first 9 months. Now, granted, I didn't have this data when we mailed notices in 2021. This is pulled out of our 2022 digest data. So I have those sales, and if anybody's interested in running those studies on the sales ratio screen, if you're not aware, instead of clicking True Study, click DOAA. If you click DOAA, that's going to use the WinGap's prior year value or the curve val from your prior digest folder and compare it to that sales price. So your data exists in one year, but you want to compare it to that current val in last year. Use your sales ratio standard study module, but uncheck True Study and check DOAA. And that's where I got these samples and these ratios. And that's pre our reval, pre our adjustments for our 2021. So again, we knew that the current market was going to continue to be inflated, that we had to perform a reevaluation again. So we just did a total reevaluation again. So I also looked at home sales. Home sales that sold more than once over a 2-year span. I had 60 samples, 60 sales of homes that sold once in 2020 and once again in 2021. I excluded those in red and blanks here that had permits. So if they were bought, revitalized, and resold, I didn't want that to skew. But you can see here, our average increase on those multiple home sales was about 142, 143%. If you equate that based on the months, that's about an 18% per month time adjustment. Now, some of those are increasing. The time per month that you can see here fluctuates with the property, location, and the dates that it sold. I did that same study from our 2021 sales versus our 2022 sales, and I had almost 30 samples here that indicated about a median change from those digest years, 133% increase. And that equated to roughly 19% per month time adjustment. Again, if you apply that time adjustment, and that's IAAO and DOR standards or accepted procedures, if you took that and subtracted that off the sale price, you're eventually going to get a very low number. So I'm not certain that that's the best approach using that time adjustment. But if you did that, it would inflate our ratio to about a 53% ratio. We also did April to April, June to June, and then tried to mirror just using the 2021, the first 9 months, like the audit sample, and you can see the difference. And that's with using the 10% time adjustment. What I found interesting as well is if you look at the appraisals that were performed in this study, all of our ratios passed. Our median there from just the appraisal, which I know is not a very good sample size, but is around a 40, 41, 42. But if you look at the sales of commercials, now there's not a whole lot of commercials in Union County. You may have more or less in your county, but if you look at the sales that were considered on commercial properties versus the appraisals, there's a huge disparity. So that didn't make sense to me either. And I thought, well, that's something I want to point out in my appeal. So to appeal, again, you have 30 days from the receipt, which I think the time's up on the 4th or 4th. After receiving the appeal within 45 days, within 45 days after receiving the request, questioning the correctness of the digest. And then after that, within 15 days after being notified of the determination by the state auditor, that's after if any changes are made. will be made or be notified 15 days afterwards. And to continue that, if you don't get the result that you're wanting with the appeal to the Department of Audits and Accounts, you can continue that appeal to the Board of Arbitrators. And that would be where the DOAA would pick an arbitrator, we would pick an arbitrator, and y'all would agree to a third arbitrator, and they would hear that case and all the information that's presented. Once that appeal is heard, the decision shall be final. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have any other avenues on any of the other issues that we can address, and I hope some of that does get addressed. One is the methodology being used, and two is what's up with the school funding. Why would these digests be inflated or deflated based on this study? What effect did that have? That's, in my opinion, a bigger concern to the county's budgets or the school system's budgets anyway. And that's about all I have. I do have an example of an appeal letter that one of the counties were gracious enough to let us share. And that's all I have. Any questions?
Yeah, there's no any questions? What we do back here?
And did you delay sending notices in Union County
Yes.
based on this?
Well, I didn't delay. I mean, we had them out before the day before we were required. I hold all of our as a standard. We try to hold our notices as late as possible. I know that's not possible in some counties, but in those counties that it is, we do our best to hold and delay that for a couple of reasons. One, so we can have time to analyze the market after January 1st. But two, some of the properties that we're appraising we're required to analyze audited financial data. Those audited financial data aren't required to be submitted to the IRS or the state agencies that govern those programs until April 15th. So it may be March before we get the data, March or April before we get the data to analyze to appraise those properties. So for those reasons, we hold our notices as late as possible, just to have more data to analyze.
I think I've seen that trend. We've been a little late to the party, but I've seen that trend in many of our neighboring counties and whatnot.
And it may be out of your control. It may be, that may be in control of another county department that you're gonna just have to mail notices by a certain date.
We can hold them as late as we need to.
Well, then I would recommend holding them as late as you need to.
I think that, but I mean, that backs up everything, but that's kind of a threat we're holding over the VOC's head. It's like, look, we give you advanced numbers in early May, that ain't gonna be happening until late June if this keeps up.
And so the strategy of holding the notices for that long is what?
So we can have more time to analyze, more data to analyze. We roll over as quick as we can. We use future year to throw in those sales. We try to stress and get as much of those straight transfer entered as we can. We may hold off on some of the splits and combinations, but if you can get all the data in there to use it, again, that's because my opinion is the best indication of market value are the closest sales that occurred to January 1st, but using sales prior to and after, not just one or the other. And another thing I don't think was brought up is June, July, March, April, May, June, July. That's the peak of the real estate market. You know, it depends on what weight, like John said, if you're putting more weight on those in October, November, December, January, February, that's the low market. And then if you're doing it through the summer, that's the high market. There's got to be some sort of median compromise there. And I think the best, and it's an IAAL accepted policy, that use those sales that span. Get rid of your time adjustments. The time adjustments are so hypothetical, in my opinion. there's so many moving parts to each one of those sales. Every sale, every property is unique and different. We're trying to create this model that works with everything, and it just won't. So you're gonna have to use common sense, use something, try to be as fair as you can with the data you have.
Yeah, COD is a good example. I mean, that's where a lot of us are in trouble this year.
Yes.
I mean, it's always been a lot higher than what we.
Yeah, but we failed in all criteria.
Yeah.
I mean, we really went out this year. We showed, I mean.
And if you don't have a chance to check those sales, that's gonna be a constant trend anyway.
Yeah.
Be out on COD and PR.
What hurts too is some counties just, ignore that sales when they get them in, so we don't find out about them until after it's too late to, say anything about them. Hey, we need to review those sales. That's important. I think you should have a team. I mean, that's where you're graded. But the method that's being used to grade our performance, I think, is the key here. That needs to be addressed. That needs to be fixed, because it's not just this year. It's occurred the same thing, just with an opposite effect pre this year.
One of the other factors that I don't know how effective it would be to bring out in any kind of appeal, but there was a lot of COVID money flowing around that people used to renovate the inside of their houses. We've been finding all that. But there's no way to know that. They're not taking out permits until you go out there and check that sale. You don't know any of that's going on.
Yeah, good point, Steve. Very good point.
Well, it's obvious there, if you compared what we went up on our digest, we only went up 25, 35 last year, 25 this year. Well, this says we should have went up on residential 42, but that's just not the case. Our ratio would be super inflated. It'd be a 50-30 ratio if we did that time adjustment.
Does anybody think that that's an effective argument? Should we bring that up?
I've never had to argue this, so this will be my first experience. I'll share with you guys once I go through that process. I look forward to meeting Lee and sharing with him my concerns. But again, I think our concerns may not be addressed at his department.
I think, and what you're talking about, the stuff that got worked on, that we didn't get permits on, whatever, that was something that I wanted to kind of include in my presentation, but I didn't. I ran out of time, because with the current market, the shorter period of stuff that's staying on the market, there is stuff that be getting done faster than we can pick it up.
Right.
So I think that's a legitimate concern.
I appreciate it, Stan. I'll tell you this is Steve Watson. For those who can't see me, I'll get into camera right now, but GMAS is here because of two different reasons. They're going to be helping us with our appeal, and you represent, but how many counties have you got on that you guys are representing?
Well, from appeal,
yeah,
we don't know the final count yet,
Right.
but it's several. I want to
Yeah.
say 10 to 20.
yeah. So this is going to help everybody in terms of understanding what we're dealing with. Really good. Love all those statistics and everything. Also, too, that appeal letter was really good. We have an appeal letter we'd be happy to share with you. If you'd like to have a copy of ours, I'll send it out so you can see what it looks like. We actually passed, the Board of Commissioners is going to vote on passing a resolution tomorrow night. We're going to the 10th degree to do that. You don't have to do that. You might have to do it in your county. Your county commission might want to do it. I don't know. But that's what we're doing. But thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I appreciate it,
Thank you.
Stan. We're going to have Kelly McCormick come up here and get set up. And if y'all want to take a potty break or anything before you get started, then this might be a good time to do it. And also, everybody, you can sign up here on the sign-up sheet here, so we'll know that who all was here. And so I appreciate that very much. Restrooms are all the way down the hall and to the left.
Sarah T, yep.
Okay, Tara with the T.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, it's good to have you.
Hey, I don't think we got a spot on there, but if you want anything from any of us, they'll put the email. And then you can do. If you signed in, we didn't leave a space for it.
Do what? That's fine. Yeah, I can, I'll just slide that around.
It's just that whatever.
How you doing?
Good, good.
Yes, you're right. We need to have, GWS and all for that. You could do probably easy 2.5 days, and just stuff like this, because you could have somebody like Sam Kelly, somebody from Arkansas come in, a very good way to help us all work and make those time adjustments. I already kind of reacted to a little high level, but not really. But, the other thing is if we need to get a module, decide that once you decide, whatever decisions are made, that you can make.
Do I need to move the camera so you can go over there?
Yeah. Automatically get a time adjustment, that you can set up a model like you do a neighborhood for time adjustments, or it's figure it out on the back there. Once you run the report, and then it will help you with the property tax. Because there's, the time adjustment.
That argument doesn't make sense.
So we could go.
But it does.
Everybody's got.
That's our rate. There it is right there. So these-
Move the camera, he's gonna be there.
Hey, everybody, we'll be back online in a second. We have a few technical difficulties to straighten out, and we'll be back on. I'll make sure I announce as we get started. Thanks for your patience. I appreciate it. Okay, we've changed to the other side of the room for y'all on Zoom. This is Kelly McCormick with McCormick Solutions, my former deputy chief appraiser, and he's going to come here and give us a presentation based on what he's seeing in the market and in the counties he's in. And so, Kelly, thank you for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity. So before we get started, I want to just get this out there that 2 months ago, month and a half, something like that, I actually made a phone call to Lee Thomas and talked with him before any of this ever happened. And I don't know if you've ever had any of those moments in life where you see the writing on the wall before it's actually there, but this market had me worried, and I'll tell you why it had me worried, and I'll tell you what were my red flags of what I kind of felt was going to happen. So Lee's probably one of the nicest guys I've ever spoken to in my entire life. He's also one of the smartest guys I've ever spoken to in my entire life when it comes to numbers and data and analytics. He's very, very smart, but he's got a skill that a lot of people don't have. He can take something that's way up here and bring it down to where, you know, people like me can understand it and understand what he's doing. And so I just wanted to throw that out there that I called him hoping that I could get a 5-minute conversation. And 45 minutes later, I hung up the phone. He was that interested on my side of everything. And the reason I'm telling you this is I'm going to share a lot of data with you. A lot of it's already been going on over. This isn't going to take very long. I'll be happy to answer any questions that I possibly can, or let somebody smarter like the two that presented before me answer it. But Lee is in a position where, and he wants to be helpful as much as he can. But you know what? Lee Thomas has a job to do. And Lee Thomas thinks and believes that he is doing the job that he's being called to do. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's not. What I will tell you is I think there's a lot of different interpretations out there as far as what we do. I think there's a lot of code section out there that muddies the water. I think a lot of what we have been trained to do through our classes is different than what the expectation of us to pass a Department of Audit study. I don't think those two things actually go together. I think we're taught to assess properties for property taxes, and then there's an audit study, and if you want to pass it, you got to do things a little bit differently. They're similar, but they're different. But I want to start out by talking about how we got here. And what I mean by here is, why does this matter now? Because Stan's right. Everything Stan told you is 100% correct. Stan was absolutely right that this has been going on for years. This has been a problem for years. But you know why nobody cared? Because most people were passing. You know, you got a class in college and you're passing the test. You don't care how you're passing the test. You're passing, right? And so it's not your problem. It's those few counties out there that aren't passing. But it's not just about the passing part of it. And Stan brought up a very interesting point a few days when I was on the phone, in a phone conversation with him. And he brought QBE up to me, and QBE just blew my mind because as I researched it, you know, the school boards are doing their part of researching data about how many students of certain types they have. And it's almost like creating a budget. There's a money amount associated with those studies. And then there's how much money the county has as taxable revenue potentially coming in. And some of you, one of you in particularly in here, I've been a very interest of, and I apologize because, you know, Teresa, Gilmer County is going to get mentioned a time or two. But when you see the adjusted digest go up by $1 billion, and you think about the impact that that has because of that tier system with QBE of who's under you as far as needing help and who's over you as far as helping, you suddenly switch to a couple places with that $1 billion because it's that adjusted price. And so there's a lot of impact that this has that I don't think a lot of us have ever been fully aware of, not to the degree that it is. I think all of us knew it had something to do with funding education. I think all of us knew about we all knew the public utilities. That's what we hang over our commissioners' heads, right? I mean, that's what we want to pass for. Make sure we collect on the public utilities. But really, public utilities ends up being a very small part when you start talking to school boards. And I found that out very quickly. But how did we get here? So I believe we've got here because we've always had a market that was pretty consistent. And when I say pretty consistent, we're used to markets. I'm not talking about what happened in 2008. We'll get there. Okay, we will get there. But since 2009 to 2019, I believe nationwide, statistically, real estate market went up on average about 32%. That's nationwide. I'm not talking about Georgia. I'm talking about nationwide. And so, you know, if you take that and you divide it out, you're looking at 3-4% a year, maybe a little bit more because in 2009 we were losing some on backing. But let's say we're going 5 or 6% a year. I think those would have been pretty good markets back in the day, right? And I think that's what we got accustomed to. Well, here's the thing about it. And we'll talk more about this in a second. But if you've made value changes and you're using sales from December or January 1st to December 31st in any given year, the year prior sales, okay? And you're setting a January 1st value, and let's say you don't trend them. You don't trend them at all, okay? And I believe, now I could be wrong, and I'm not going to ask for hands, and I don't want anybody I think majority of the counties are probably doing it this way. I think they were taking the sales straight up. I think they were taking them without trending them. And we're going to get into more of that at the end of this discussion too. But you were okay. You're okay at the end of the year. You know why? The market only moved 5% in the whole year. We assess at 40%, right? So for every point of a ratio study, that equals 2.5% of value change. So 5%, if you set your values at 40, your Department of Audit study came in at 39. If you're at 39 and some change, you came in at 38. You're a little bit lower than what your internal study said, but you're okay. You know what you do? You go about doing business. Why? No reason to slow down. No reason to question. Well, both those methodologies, whether you trended the sales or didn't, you come to a very similar place because the market only moved 5%. What happens when the market moves 20%? Oh, wait a minute. Now what happens if you don't trend sales? You got 10% on either side of it. You set your values at 40. That's July 1st. You got 10% before the end of the year. You're at a 36. Or maybe lower. Possibly you just failed your test because of a market movement in really 1 or 2 years. Let's talk about how that happened though. So first thing that I want y'all to take a look at is days on the market. And so this is going from 2019, 2020, 2021. In 2019, 55 days. This is Georgia data. This is from the Georgia State Realtors. 55 days was the average time on the market for a residential property. In 2020, 51 days. In 2021, 29 days. So what does that mean for you? That means that those updates people are doing to their properties. Remember when the houses used to stay on the market for 3 or 4 months? Well, guess what? We have an opportunity to pick those updates up before those sales are used in the next year. It almost feels fair, doesn't it? Well, if they're selling them within a month, they're doing the updates the month before or 2 months before and finishing these up. If you've got dates or sales that they're using in June or July or August or September of the next year, there is a high likelihood in this market right now, with the average time on the market being 29 days, that those houses, any updates done to them were done in the same year that they're sold. Well, how does that affect value? How many houses have you went out to and you read the MLS listing and you were like, oh, I didn't know they had their basement finished. Oh, this picture is a painted house, and the one I took last year is an unpainted house. And they fixed those issues on the porch. They got a new roof. What if, and maybe some crazy guy like me the last 2 weeks that all I've done is lived and slept and ate this, took the Department of Audit studies, and I decided, you know what, just to see if it makes any sense at all, I'm going to arbitrarily on improved properties add 5% if they're in February before I apply my time adjustment. And then if they're in March, I'm going to add 7.5. In April and after, I'm going to add 10%. I'm just going to see what happens. And magically, the numbers got better. And numbers don't normally lie. And so, am I telling you that what I did was right? No. What I'm telling you is what I did was statistically significant. And actually probably had improvements done to them prior to them being sold. And we got to, I'm not saying that there's a good way to even account for that. I'm just giving you some issues that I've seen. So the next thing, we've already talked about this, the median sale for each year. 2019, 228,000. 2020, 252, 541. And in 2021, 295. John had these same numbers. I was really glad our numbers matched up because we didn't talk about this part of it. And when I saw his numbers, I'm like, hey, those look familiar. So that's good. We got the same data. But going up from in 2020, 252, and again, statewide information to 295. Months supply. 2019, there was 3.3 months supply on the market. That gives you an indication of how long things could possibly stay on the market or how many houses were available. Well, in 2020, it dropped to 1.6 months. In 2021, it dropped to 1.2 months. So literally going from 19 to 20, it got cut in half. As far as how many months supply of available residential properties you had to choose from. It's become a feeding frenzy. Why are people outbidding each other? Because there's no other option. If you've sold your house and you have to get a house, well, guess what? You're going to be competing because there's not any supply out there. Again, average sale price, we've already talked about that. The average going from 272,000 to 302,000 up to 352, average being a lot significantly higher than the median, telling me that there's some really high-end homes somewhere in this study, right? Some really high dollar values that are bringing that average up. So again, talking about how we got here, this chart goes all the way back to the year 2000, and this is interest rates. And you're like, well, what does interest rates have to do with us? Right now, it has everything to do with us, okay? So back in 2000, the interest rate was 8.15%. If you bought a $250,000 house, the mortgage by itself, without all the insurance, without anything added to it, would be $1,860 a month. If you bought that same $250,000 house, not the same house, but a $250,000 house, in the year 2021, you would pay $1,007 a month. So let's say you're somebody out there that can spend $1,500 a month. That's how much you can spend, right? $1,500 a month on your house payment. That is your budget. Well, guess what? Let's start selling houses like cars. I don't want to talk to you about the end number. I want to talk to you about how much you can afford monthly. What happens through here is we have a decrease, and you can see it up here. Here's the decrease in the interest rates. There's a decrease in the monthly payments, obviously, but then it starts to go back up, and then it goes down. And we hit the recession years, and it comes back up a little bit, and it goes down, comes back up. And it's been doing the seesaw effect for a while, but it has stayed low for a long time. If you look at this period from about 2000, I'd say 2013 onward, we have some unnaturally low interest rates for a really long time. And what is different about that is a lot of times interest rates drop so that the economy can recover, but then they go right back up. It's a checks and back, it's to, okay, everybody's recovered. Let's make sure we're getting our money back again, right? The banks need to make their money. Everybody's got to make their money, right? And so it tends to go back up, but it stayed low so long that the real estate market actually had a chance to get the values up to what people can now afford. And see, because unlike 2008, you don't have nearly as many, you have more people working from home, but you don't have a lot of job loss. You don't have a lot of the same type of deals that were going on back then. You don't have people losing their homes. It's a different kind of economy. We're not dealing with the same thing. And everybody that wants to try to make it, compare one time period to another time period. Yeah, the economy wasn't doing so good, but interest rates have stayed low for such a long time that if you can afford $1,500 a month, you can afford higher than a $250,000 house. And there's a mental aspect of all this. So that person that thinks that they're going to go on the market and they think, well, you know what, I'm only going to qualify for $250,000 because in our head, that's the house I can afford, right? Then you go to your lender and they say, oh, you qualify for $400,000. You're like, what? It's time to get, yes, we finally made it in the world, right? But it's not true because it has everything to do about the interest rates. You see, that $1,000 payment a month 2 years ago would have been $1,268. That's $268 more a month over the course of 30 years. That's a lot of money. That 2 years worth of interest rates changed. So why are we here? Did the housing market suddenly just explode? Kind of. But it has a lot more to do with the financing side of it because real estate agents finally figured out that they can sell the $250,000 house for $400,000 and they still get that 6%. That's what happened. It finally caught up to itself. So what does it have to do with us? Well, it's the beginning of our conversation. We're going back in time a little bit, right? Remember I told you we were used to 5 to 6% increases a year? Well, what would happen if it increased 20% in 1 year? Well, it did in a lot of places. In all of Georgia, no. You've already seen maps. A lot of counties that had passing ratios, they didn't have 20% increases. They don't have the same driving markets. And since they didn't have the same increases, they could increase their digest a mere 5 or 6% and pass, or do almost nothing and pass. They don't have the quantity of sales or the driving market. Stan mentioned it earlier too as well. These counties that have something that draw people in, that have the lakes, that have all these things, that have something that, I want to live here, but I want to work over there, or I want to work from home now. That's the option, right? What we're dealing with is if your market moved in the 20% range and you did not trend sales, it's next to impossible to pass the Department of Audit study. If you didn't include, like Stan was saying, April to April, or if you didn't do something, right? There's a lot of ways to skin that cat. But if you didn't do something, it's going to be really hard to pass. But it was something we've never really dealt with before. It's something that none of the classes, the DOR classes, you will get sales training, okay? But it will be in the way of a comparable and subject property, right? You'll have your subject, you'll have your 4 comparables. One of your comparables will be more than 6 months old, and you'll need to do a time adjustment on that one property to get it like that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about mass time adjustments. This is a totally different topic. You could probably teach a course on it for 3 days and not cover the whole thing. But while we were there, I wanted to establish what I think, and this is very much so Kelly McCormick. Do not pin all this on. If I say something dumb, don't pin it on my uncle, okay? It's not here, he can't defend himself. But this is my ideas from looking at a lot of data from the past couple of weeks. But this is why I think we're where we're at, okay? This is my interpretation of what the market has done. So I want to show you 2 different counties and their time adjustments. I want to show you the improved, and I want to show you the vacant and how very different that they are. And I want to also show you kind of what visually is going on whenever they're trending your sales. And so this is January through September. This is one of the counties that got 9 months instead of 6 months. But I want you to notice to June what these curves look like as far as how the market was moving through June. Then I want you to notice July, August, and September. This county passed its median by quite a bit. It failed its COD though. You want to take a guess at why it might have failed its COD? If I remove the months of July, August, and September from their study, the COD passes with flying colors. It was. There's a particular subdivision here that is gated, and many of you will know what county, you can deduce what county I'm talking about pretty quickly, and they wouldn't mind me talking about it, but the sales that happen during the summer months in that particular subdivision are all over the place. Now, as you can see down here, I've got an I and a V down here. This is for improved. If I hit improved, it tightens up a little bit, especially through June. The graphs tighten up a little bit, and you can see that the original sales have a downward trend, and my trended sales are flattening out that curve. And that's really what you're doing. You're making your June, July, August sales like your January sales, right? So there's your improved, but look at my vacant. I also want you to notice on my improved, I started out at 3762, well, trended 3762. It goes across down into the 36s, and then we won't even talk about the mess at the end. Vacant, though, starts out at 3967. Well, here's the thing. A lot of times, your vacant properties do not and will not need the same trend that your improved properties get. More than that, sometimes they don't need a trend at all. Financing is not the same if you go out and try to buy a vacant piece of land. See if you get the same financing your buddy did that bought the house. You're not going to get it. The amount of money you got to put down is more significant in percentage wise. Let's go to the second county. I want to show you the same thing. This is only through June. Do you notice the same similar tendencies in this curve here? Here's your improved. You see how flat that top line is? That's my trended. So once it's trended, you see how I can treat June just like I treat January? That's what they're doing. That in theory, this is about a 15% adjustment on both of these counties. But vacant. Again, do you notice anything similar about some of these graphs? Go back to your counties and put your sales by month in the medians on a chart and look at them. Look at the ones that they handpicked for you. See what it's doing. Because if you don't take a look at this, if you're not looking at what your improved properties are doing versus vacant properties, in this county, neither one of these did the vacant properties need any kind of adjustment. And I can go back to our internal study and show that we were good that year too. It just didn't move in the same way. The vacant properties just are not selling at the same rate that your improved properties. So I don't know about y'all, but I had a lot of vacant properties on both of these. And when your COD's out, well, if half of your properties are being valued too high or too low, and then they're time adjusted, they're just getting further away. But let's talk about COD again for a second. If you change 20%, let's go back to the old days, right? 5%. They get the days we like, right? You don't trend your sales. You get a middle of the year value. You're off by 2.5% here, 2.5% here. Your outliers are only 2.5% away, which is 1 as far as looking at 40. So you're at 40, you got some 39s and some change, and you got some 41s and some change, and you're good. Everything's good in the world. Your COD's tight. All right, now you're at 20 and you don't trend. 20% for the year. You got 10% on either side. You got 36s on one side and you got 44s on the other. Your COD's already artificially bad to start out with. Steve and I used to have these talks about, hey, in this market, I used to like to see single digit CODs, right? And as the market just kept progressing, it used to be like, you know what, 10's not so bad. You know what, 11 looks good.
Yeah.
12's awesome countywide, right? Our mentality has been changing over the course of years. We just haven't been able to put our fingers on why. We knew there were things going on, but you know what? Not enough of us failed the test for us to care enough. And I'm just going to say it. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to be a part of it. I didn't care enough. You know why? Because Hall County was passive, right? Now suddenly we all care. Now we want to get to the bottom of it. So I think we're going to be left with just a couple of options at the end of the day. And we'll talk about those in just a second. I got one more thing that I really want to share with you as far as some information I could pop. So I was really, really, really bored at my house and in my basement. And I decided I was going to grab all of you guys, every single county in the state. I grabbed your 2020 digests, your actually submitted digest numbers. I grabbed your 2021 digests, and I can put them on the same spreadsheet. And then I grabbed your 2020 ratios and your 2021 ratios. Interesting thing with your digest is it doesn't just tell me the percentage that the digest as a whole went up. It tells me how much your residential went up, how much your commercial went up. It has all kinds of cool information. Well, a lot of people that were concerned and calling me, they wanted to know about residential. That was all they wanted to talk about. I know some people may have issues otherwise, and that commercial and industrial, most places did not move in the same way that residential did. Ag land did not move in quite the same way. It had an effect on it because if there's a house on it, almost everything can be thrown into that bucket as far as being affected by this market. But residential properties were affected in a very particular and very severe way. And I think that's where a lot of people felt the pain. The other thing is residential properties make up a huge percentage of a ton of counties' digests. Which leads me to this next point. So I've got everybody on here. I've got how much you went up on your residential properties. And I find it very interesting that if I put everybody on here, the average, or no, the median 2021 ratio was a 37-21. And we talked about it. 95 were, under the 38. So of course, there's going to be a majority of the properties. It's going to be on the low side. But if I put everybody in there together, the median's a 37-21. Well, here's something interesting. If you had to put your money on the counties that were going to pass this year, right? I don't know about you, but I would have put my money on the ones who raise their residential properties the most. That's where I'd have put my money. And I would have lost all of it. Because if I change this, sorry, that's the wrong number. This is all dynamic, and the reason I set it up this way is I did not want to take screenshots of every single thing I'm about to do or could do. This is counties that change their digest 15% or more. The median drops to a 36-37. 7 out of the 11 counties that you're looking at that change their residential property to 15% or more, maybe below a 38. More so than that, only one of these counties, which is Wilcox, which is one of them that passed, their residential their residential value of their digest is only 30%. The rest of them are 51% or greater, as far as what the residential portion of the digest compared to the entire digest. And so, as you're looking through here, where I would have said, hey, these people have a likelihood of passing, they didn't. And many of them were good in the year before. So in 2020, many of these had passing ratios. So how do you have a passing ratio? You're primarily residential. You go up more than 15% and then you go down. This is the red flag for me during my weeks of study that I couldn't make this one make sense. Now look, I started this whole conversation off saying, I like Lee. I think Lee's smart. I think the Department of Audits is doing a good job at what they're doing. I think, however, we're looking at two totally different things in two totally different ways. And we could talk about this stuff all day long because there's all kinds of counties data in there, but it does have county names in there. That's why I kind of put this in Power BI. I didn't want to, I'm not here to point fingers at anybody. I'm here to point everybody in a direction that you can look in your own time and see that it just doesn't really pass the eyeball test. And if it doesn't pass the eyeball test, then it makes me feel like something's inherently maybe missing from the study. If counties that were above a 38 last year, many of them, 70% or more of their digest is residential, and then they don't pass. That doesn't make sense to me. That I need more data, right? I need more explanation. And so I can look at only the counties that are 50% or more of their digest is made. Well, you know what? If I could. Yeah, okay. I could look at just the ones that are 50% or more and other digest is residential. That also is a 36.97. So it's lower than the whole. We could look at it by how much value. So if we look at the highest valued counties in the state, we notice it's at 37.47. There's a ton of properties to pick from. You were talking larger sample size, better results. 37.47, that's closer to the average. All of these are primarily residential. I think this gives some credence to what Stan has already said. The larger the sample size, the better the results you're going to get. Well, they're getting good results as far as probably what they captured in-house because they have more properties to choose from. And so as you get more properties to choose from and more samples, less of those outliers are going to have less and less and less effect, right? Because you're getting more of what is made up of the middle here. So there's all kinds of data that this could show. And like I said, I'm going to be very careful with this. Again, because this is not about pointing fingers at anybody or saying that anything's been done wrong or who did good or who did bad. This was more for me that I wanted to see if some common themes that I had in my head played out. One thing I talked about with John, I was so glad to see his maps and everything because, you know, our conversation sometimes will have some really good ideas, but I don't always have time to go back and do it. And, you know, John went and he actually created the maps to show that maybe there was a little bit of bias there. Of course, there's going to be bias. Some of these counties just don't have the same kind of market. So I mentioned that there's two possible outcomes, and you've seen some of this already, but I want to start with this page. You've already seen this. This is what the Department of Audits is told to do as far as for each of the county, establish a ratio, assess value to fair market value. Reads on, but there's one part, and I was so glad. I saw Stan had this. I was like, please God, don't let him highlight that one section. I just want to, I'm last. I just want one thing. Just give me one crumb saying, come on, man. But after, toward the middle, and we did read this, the representative number of transactions shall not include any parcel of which the sales price is not reflective of the fair market value of such property as fair market value is defined in Code Section 4852. Let's go read that because it's interesting. 4852, going down to 3, fair market value of property. Did you know that Georgia has one of the longest definitions of fair market value of property of any state? I looked up all of them and it's crazy. Ours is, most of them have the first line. Means the amount an eligible buyer would pay for the property and a willing seller would accept the property at arm's length bona fide sale. And that's it.
Yeah.
Seems like ours used to be like that. And every year they add something to it, right?
That was about 1988.
Yeah. So let's read what I got highlighted. Notwithstanding any other provision of this chapter to the contrary, the transaction amount of the most recent arm's length bona fide sale in any year shall be the maximum allowable fair market value for the next taxable year. You see, we've always had an issue with the look forward. I just never really put my finger on why I have an issue with the look forward. I've always had an issue with trending sales. I never really put my finger on why I had the issue of trending sales. Then the Department of Audits decided that they were going to send this study out, and I think I've come to my own conclusion. I'm not asking anybody to agree with me, right? I'm just throwing out a point, and if you like it, good. Ask your county attorney, do whatever. I've talked to a couple attorneys about it. But see, we throw around the term SB 346 all the time. We say, oh, that's an SB 346. So, no. That is a fair market value, is what that is. Why? Because the legislator said so.
Oh, that's right.
And so if I trend that sale, let's say it's a January sale, all right? You got a subdivision. And there's 10 sales in this subdivision. And 3 of the sales come from January. The rest come scattered throughout the year, right? There's one in December. The first one is for $300,000 early in January. The last one's for $350,000, right, by the end of December. And I take it and I trend all those sales to the December, and I place $350,000 on all those properties. But didn't the legislature tell me that I'm not just giving them a sale price? You know why? State legislature can't pass an exemption to make they can't make it an exemption. They cannot pass an exemption for all counties to follow. So they had to find some place to insert this so that it would still work. And where did they insert it? They inserted it to fair market value. And so now you got to tell a taxpayer that, yeah, it's their fair market value, but it's not your fair market value. I think you start running into a little bit of a problem. Now, if you took the 350 and the 300 and you priced everybody out at 325, you could say, well, you know what? This January sale was just as important as this December sale. And so I used them and everybody came into the middle. because that's what happened during the course of the year. I know we got evaluation day to January 1st. I love how nothing's very great and clear about what you're supposed to do with that valuation date. I love how, ambiguous they are about it. You have to go to a section for returns to get an actual January 1st date and everything. It's not even in here about fair market value. It's not even in the definition, right? So what is fair market value? Do we as appraisers and in assessors' offices, do we not have a scope of work? Anytime you take any kind of fee appraisal or grab-related class, you're going to be talking about a scope of work. And that scope of work better be to place fair market value on all the taxable properties within your county of every digest class. That should be your goal. Well, go back to what is fair market value? Fair market value is whatever the legislature says it is. And this is where I have a big problem. My big problem is the legislature is telling me that sale in January is just as important as that sale in December. That's what they're telling me. You know why? Because I can't raise that value higher than what it sold for. Well, if I can't do that to that one property, do you think the legislature didn't want us to apply this to everybody else? This was in the same time period. They were telling us to use bank sales and auctions and everything else. So aren't we supposed to consider legislative intent? All I'm saying is that I think there is a bigger deal. I don't think we are arbitrarily just not trending sales to not trend sales. I think there's actually been a reason for it. I don't think we've ever really discussed why it is. SB 346 has been a huge issue. It was a big issue when it came out. But here's the funny side of this whole story. The Department of Audits actually used SB 346 as the reason that they weren't going to do the look back.
That's right.
For every, action, there's a reaction, right? Well, if there's a reason if they can't do a look back for them, isn't there probably a reason they shouldn't be doing a look forward for us? Because if that's the digest value for the year before, well, I was having to use that in the same thing. Just go back home. If you don't believe me, if you don't trend sales, go back home, take your audit department study. And what I want you to do is I want you to trend your sales. But I don't want you to trend them to January 1st. I want you to trend them to July 1st of the previous year. I want you to see what your number comes up to. I bet you more people in here will have 39 and some changes than you've ever seen before. And the reason is because if we're really treating January and December equally, we're going to come out somewhere in the middle. And I guarantee you, all of you, if you do that, am I saying the Department of Audits is going to do this? No. They're going to do it the way that they feel like they should do it. And there's code sections for that. And that's kind of where I end this whole, well, we started there. Again, one thing is, and I'll say this, the representative number of transactions shall not include any parcel with sales price is not reflective of fair market value. We have to go back to that definition of fair market value. And in the APM, this is one of the only places you will hear or read of anything with time adjustments. It's scattered out through there. I'm not saying there's not anymore, but I just wanted to show that there is some direction in here. Adjustments to the sales to be considered by the appraiser include, but are not limited to, first one mentioned, time of sale. So one of two things has got to happen. Either a better system of how to audit us has to be come up with. And I'll tell you why. See, those counties that hold their notices forever and get all the months in, they can chase those sales. I'm not in a county right now. I can kind of just say whatever, and you can take it, leave it, whatever. But you could chase all of them down. But how does that affect everybody on the bigger scheme of things? Let's just say that they didn't change any other properties, and all they did was chase sales. They chased them for the year behind them. They chased them for the year in front of them. That's kind of like doing 2 years worth of work. It's sounding better and better all the time, I guess. But then they get a 39 and some change, right, on their median because they chase these sales down. Their overall digest is arbitrarily low. when it comes to QBE study. Why? Because it doesn't get, they didn't change all their properties. They only they chased down the ones they needed to.
I know in the past that you could request from the audit department, the list of counties that failed based on sale chasing. Do they still do that study, that performance study on counties that were cited for sales chasing?
You know, I haven't heard of anybody being cited in a really, really long time. That conversation though, John had it in, I believe it was in your presentation about like the percentage of parcels changed versus the number of sales. I just don't know that I've never seen anything that really showed me like they had a good way of going about that.
Right. I said that because that's the whole purpose of trying to do it properly and doing the right thing to changing the entire model and applying it to everybody and not sale chasing.
Right.
If they're not, if they're not testing that, whether it be the Department of Revenue or Audit Department,
Right.
why don't we sell chasing?
Well,
You know,
right.
no, I mean, he made a good point.
But the bad thing is if you sales chase it, okay. Teresa,
No,
can
I
I pick on
agree.
you for a second?
Sure.
Okay, so anybody that knows about Montgomery County and their, their adjusted digest, it really did. It went up by like $1 billion or something like that. It was crazy. Let's pretend that Teresa was one of these people and she chased all her sales, right? She would have came out with a 39 and some change and her digest would have been left at what it was.
That's where the EV cost.
But she tried to do her job and go up on 19% on residential properties, which tells me they ain't sales chasing. And it goes up $1 billion and places you in a different,
And you pay.
and you fail. That is what has kept me, that's kind of what has kept me up for the last 2 weeks. That is what's kept me, focused in on this.
You're not alone.
The only way that I figure, or, when we have the digest submission forms, and one of those forms is, you have so many days to work the appeals, or how many, if you're over 50% of your, parcels that you reappraised, you get a certain amount. That's the form, I think, that they can look at to see if you've appraised so many properties. That's the only form I know of.
That's a really good point. I've never, again, I get set in the mindset of, that's for this, compartmentalizing everything. But even though there's some things that they do for appeal reasons that would actually be applicable to do sales chaser.
Right.
That's a really good point. And what's bad is department audits and revenue are so separated. I mean, like, they don't even like to associate. They don't like us to associate them with each other at all. The fact I put them in the same sentence may be against their, code of ethics or whatever, but they do not want to be associated with each other, but there's good reason for that. It's kind of one of those things where too much intermingling and it looks like there's cohesion, it looks bad. But what I'm scared of is they get this information, right? And they never get it, or vice versa, And I think a lot of this information would be nice for both sides to have to do some of the things y'all are talking about, as far as a ratio study by itself doesn't tell anybody if a county is doing their job or not. And it's really hard for me to run the counties that go up 15% or more, and more than half of them are failing. That, to me, it sounds like the people that are trying the hardest to do their job are the ones that are getting punished the worst.
Yeah.
That's it.
You have anything? Is it?
Yeah, that's it.
Does anybody else have any questions from the Zoom world? Y'all have any questions out there? Y'all have any more questions for Kelly, or in general, have any kind of ideas that you'd like to promote or what have you? John, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I just want to point out that Kelly and Stan and I, none of us collaborated on our presentations. So the information you saw that overlapped, it's stuff we're all seeing in different places. So, that's kind of reassuring for me to see that, other people are seeing the same things I'm seeing. And so, when y'all get back, if y'all have, I've got, for those of us that are here, I can't do for the same people, but I would have got some of my cards put up here. If y'all, and we've got some of y'all's emails, if you want the stuff that we're gonna share, we can send it to you. If, and Teresa asked me if I could help her with a couple of scripts. If y'all are, looking for how to find this data in your own systems, if you got questions about how to get it, if you're contracted with, GMAS or with, McCormick or with any other contractor, they probably know how to get it. But if you've got somebody who uses SQL in your office, but you're not contracted with anybody, I don't mind sharing some of the scripts that I use to pull some of this information. I don't share scripts to tell people how to change stuff, but if you just want to look something up, I can share that with you. But you can pick up one of my cards. If you've got questions for Kelly or Stan, if you don't have their emails, I can relay it to them. Or you can get their emails from them right here.
Thank you, John. We'll have a 1 o'clock session, which you're going to state that you can. It's going to be a repeat of what we did here. I won't be in here. I got a BOE hearing over here in the other room I got to go to, but I'll be back. But John and Nicole will run it. I just appreciate everybody coming here today and taking interest in this. And when you and I were talking just a while ago, and John and I talked about this as well, that we probably need to have some seminars or some classes or something just to kind of get us more in tune with how to make time adjustments, how we should view that, and maybe how the Department of Audit does that. Because it's probably a little off, because I think it was Kelly that mentioned the fact that we never, as long as we're good, we're not, we don't really concern ourselves with it too much. And so it affected more of us this year. 2/3 of us fell below 38. So that kind of gets our attention. So our friends at the Department of Audits are just that, they're friends. They do a lot of complex work, and I'm proud to say that, they're friends and former coworkers to me, just like they are the rest of you. But anyway, I appreciate everybody's attendance. If y'all won't stay, it's fine. There's a donut for the road and coffee, and there's plenty of restaurants around here. And thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Think about that.
You want-
Take a picture of those emails. So we have them.
So what now?
People are leaving their emails. We don't get to get those emails.
Yeah.
I'll take a picture of them so we have them in case it goes away. I'll give them to John then. I don't know if there's any others.